The cherry blossoms were in full bloom when Miyuki Tanaka's world changed forever. On that spring morning 3 years ago, she had walked confidently into the Tokyo Performing Arts Center, her sheet music tucked neatly under her arm, ready for what should have been the most important rehearsal of her life. Now those same cherry trees bloomed outside her apartment window, but Miyuki couldn't find beauty in them anymore. Her small apartment in the quiet neighborhood of Yanaka felt more like a museum of her former life than a home. Framed concert programs hung on the walls. Trophies and certificates from piano competitions sat collecting dust on bookshelves, and in the center of her living room stood the grand piano, a Yamaha C7X, that her parents had sacrificed everything to buy for her when she was just 16. Miyuki wheeled herself to the window and looked out at the busy street below. People hurried past, heading to work, to lunch, to lives that continued moving forward. Her hand unconsciously moved to her legs, feeling the dead weight beneath the blanket she always kept over them, even in the warmth of late spring. 3 years, she whispered to herself. 3 years since the taxi she was riding in had been hit by a truck that ran a red light. 3 years since she'd woken up in a hospital to the news that her spinal cord had been damaged. 3 years since the doctor had said words that still echoed in her nightmares. "You may never walk again." The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Miyuki considered letting it go to voicemail as she often did, but something made her wheel over to answer it. "Hello?" "Miyuki-chan." "You actually answered." The cheerful voice belonged to Hana, her oldest friend from music school. "I was sure I'd get your voicemail again." Miyuki smiled despite herself. Hana had remained stubbornly present in her life, refusing to let Miyuki disappear completely after the accident. "I'm having a good day," Miyuki said. Though it wasn't entirely true, she just had less energy for hiding today. "Good, because I have news that might make it even better. My students are giving a recital next weekend, and I'd love for you to come." Miyuki's smile faded. "Hana, you know I don't—" "Before you say no," Hana interrupted, "just listen. One of my students, little Yuki, she's only 8, she's playing that Chopin piece you used to love. The one you played at the prefecture competition when we were in high school. Nocturne in E-flat major," Miyuki said automatically. Her fingers twitched, muscle memory recalling the gentle opening notes. "Yes, that one. And she keeps saying how she wants to play it just like the lady in the video her mother showed her." Guess who that lady was? Miyuki closed her eyes. Someone had recorded her performance at that competition. The video had made its way online years ago. "I don't know, Hana. Being in that environment again. Just think about it," Hana said gently. "It would mean the world to Yuki, and to me." After hanging up, Miyuki sat motionless for a long time. The idea of attending a recital, of being surrounded by music again, of watching others do what she once could, it made her stomach knot with anxiety. Her gaze drifted to the piano. The beautiful instrument stood silently in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Dust had settled on its polished surface. She hadn't played a single note since coming home from the rehabilitation center. She hadn't even lifted the fallboard to expose the keys. Her physical therapist had actually encouraged her to return to playing, insisting it would be good for her recovery, for her spirits. "Many pianists have adapted," he'd said. "Your upper body strength is excellent. There are techniques, pedal extensions," but Miyuki had shut him down. She couldn't bear the thought of playing as less than what she had been. Before the accident, she had been on the verge of a breakthrough. After years of competitions, recitals, and endless practice sessions, she had finally been invited to perform as a soloist with the Tokyo Symphony Orchestra. Critics had called her Japan's most promising new classical talent. A European tour had been in discussions. All of it vanished in the screech of brakes and the crunch of metal. Miyuki wheeled herself to the kitchen to make tea. As the water heated, she picked up the small framed photo on her counter, herself at age 5 sitting at a piano for the first time, her face lit with pure joy. She had fallen in love instantly with the way the keys felt under her small fingers, the magic of pressing them and creating sounds that could make people smile or cry. The kettle whistled, bringing her back to the present. As she prepared her tea, her phone pinged with a message. It was from her mother. "Calling tonight at 8, please answer this time." "We worry," guilt washed over her. Her parents lived in Osaka, where she had grown up. They had wanted to move to Tokyo after her accident, to help care for her, but Miyuki had refused. Their lives were in Osaka, Her father's dental practice, her mother's teaching position, their friends and community. And selfishly, Miyuki couldn't bear for them to see her like this, diminished and bitter. Their weekly video calls were painful enough. She sipped her tea and wheeled back to the living room, stopping before the piano. Almost without thinking, she reached out and ran her fingers along its smooth edge. Her neighbor upstairs began playing music, something modern and upbeat that filtered through the ceiling. Mrs. Yamamoto, an elderly widow who lived next door, was watering plants on her balcony and singing softly to herself. Life continued all around Miyuki, filled with sound and movement while she remained frozen in time. The memory of her last performance came unbidden. It had been at a small community center, a charity event for children's music education. Nothing special, nothing grand, just a favor for a former teacher. She had played Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece so familiar to her fingers that she could play it half asleep. She had performed it beautifully but distractedly, her mind already on the upcoming symphony performance. If she had known it would be her last time playing before an audience, would she have approached it differently? Would she have poured more of herself into every note, savored each moment her feet worked the pedals, appreciated the ease with which she could rise from the bench and bow? A sudden urge overcame her. Not to play, she wasn't ready for that, but to at least open the piano to see the keys again. With slightly trembling hands, she reached forward and lifted the fallboard. The black and white keys seemed to glow in the afternoon light. They looked exactly as they always had, waiting patiently for her touch. Miyuki held her breath, half expecting something to be different, but of course nothing was. The piano hadn't changed. Only she had. She extended her right hand, hovering her fingers over the keys without touching them. In her mind, she could hear the opening notes of the Rachmaninoff concerto she had been preparing for the symphony performance, the piece she never got to play. The doorbell rang, breaking the spell. Miyuki quickly closed the piano and wheeled to the door. It was Mrs. Yamamoto, holding a small plate covered with a cloth. "I made too many rice balls," the older woman said with a smile that suggested this was no accident. "I thought you might enjoy some." Miyuki accepted the plate with a small bow. "Thank you, that's very kind." Mrs. Yamamoto hesitated at the door. "I heard from the building manager that you were a pianist before." "Well, before." Miyuki stiffened but nodded. "My late husband loved piano music. He used to play recordings every evening after dinner." Her eyes crinkled warmly. "I would love to hear you play someday if you ever feel like it." Before Miyuki could respond that such a day would never come, Mrs. Yamamoto had patted her hand and turned to leave. "Enjoy the rice balls, dear. The red ones have umeboshi inside." Alone again, Miyuki placed the rice balls on her kitchen counter and stared at them. Such a simple act of kindness, yet it left her feeling oddly unsettled. How many other neighbors knew she was the pianist who doesn't play anymore? Was that how people defined her now? It was better than the woman in the wheelchair, she supposed, but not by much. As evening approached, Miyuki prepared a simple dinner and ate while watching the news. A story came on about a famous violinist who was performing at Suntory Hall that weekend. She quickly changed the channel. Her phone rang at exactly 8:00. Her parents were nothing if not punctual. "Hello, Mom," she answered, trying to inject warmth into her voice. "Miyuki, how are you, sweetheart? Is everything okay with the new aide?" Her mother's face on the screen looked worried as usual. "Kimiko is fine. She comes 3 times a week as planned." "And your exercises? Are you keeping up with them?" "Yes, Mom." Her father's face appeared beside her mother's. "You look thin, Miyuki. Are you eating properly?" The conversation continued like this. Gentle interrogations about her health, her apartment, whether she needed anything. Miyuki answered each question patiently, assuring them she was managing well. She didn't mention Hana's invitation or her moment with the piano earlier that day. After they hung up, the apartment felt especially quiet. Miyuki wheeled to her bedroom but paused as she passed the piano. In the dim evening light, it looked like a sleeping giant. For the first time in 3 years, she considered what it would be like to play again. Not to perform, she couldn't imagine that, but just to make music for herself. Would it feel like meeting an old friend, or would it only remind her of everything she had lost? She continued to her bedroom without answering that question. As she prepared for sleep, her phone pinged with another message from Hana. "The recital is Sunday at 2. Yuki would be so excited to meet the pianist from her favorite video. Think about it. Miyuki set the phone down without replying. But as she lay in bed that night, she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, imagining music. Not just hearing recorded pieces in her memory, but actively thinking about how her hands would shape phrases, how she would approach dynamics, how she would interpret a piece if she were to play it now. For the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep thinking not about what she had lost, but about the one thing that had defined her entire life before the accident, the piano that sat silent in her living room, waiting for her to find the courage to begin again. Sunday arrived with unexpected sunshine after days of rain. Miyuki had barely slept the night before, her mind racing between firm decisions not to attend the recital and anxious planning about what she would wear if she did go. By noon, she found herself in front of her closet, hands trembling slightly as she selected a simple blue dress she hadn't worn since before the accident. It still fit, though it hung differently on her frame now. 3 years of limited mobility had changed her body in ways that still sometimes surprised her. "This is a mistake," she muttered to herself as she applied a light touch of makeup. She hadn't bothered with makeup in months. Who was there to impress in her apartment? When the taxi arrived, Miyuki almost called to cancel it. But something pushed her forward, perhaps Hana's persistence, or the thought of disappointing little Yuki, or maybe just the growing weariness of her isolated existence. The community center where the recital was being held had a ramp, but it was steep. The taxi driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, helped her navigate it without making a fuss. "My daughter plays violin in her school orchestra," he said conversationally. "Music is such a gift, isn't it?" Miyuki nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Already her heart was pounding at the thought of entering a performance space again. The lobby was crowded with parents, grandparents, and siblings of the performers. Miyuki immediately felt conspicuous in her wheelchair, aware of curious glances and sympathetic smiles. She was about to turn around when Hana spotted her. "Miyuki!" Her friend rushed over, elegant in a simple black dress, her face lighting up with genuine surprise. "You came, I can't believe it." Hana leaned down to hug her, and Miyuki caught the familiar scent of her friend's jasmine perfume, the same one she'd worn since music school. Something about that small constant in a world that had changed so drastically brought tears to Miyuki's eyes. "Don't make a big deal," Miyuki said, blinking away the moisture. "I'm not staying long." "Of course not," Hana agreed quickly, though her smile suggested she didn't believe it. "Come on, I saved you a spot in the back. Easy access." As they entered the recital hall, the sound of a piano being tuned sent a physical jolt through Miyuki's body. She hadn't been this close to live piano music since the accident. The space was modest, just a small stage with a single upright piano, nothing like the concert halls Miyuki had once performed in. Parents were settling into folding chairs, programs clutched in hand, many holding flowers for their children. "The kids range from 6 to 14, Hana explained as she guided Miyuki to her reserved space. "Some are just beginners, so please be gentle in your assessment." Miyuki shook her head. "I'm not here to judge anyone." "No, but you've got that pianist's critical ear." "I know you can't turn it off," Hana winked. "Yuki is second to last. She specifically requested that spot because she says it's not quite as scary as going last." The lights dimmed, and Hana hurried off to herd her nervous students backstage. Miyuki took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd attended hundreds of recitals in her life, as a student, as a performer, as a guest. Why did this one make her palms sweat? A small boy, no more than 6, opened the program with a simple rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." His feet didn't reach the pedals, and he played with just one finger on each hand. But his face showed such concentration that Miyuki couldn't help but smile. One by one, the children performed. Some played well, some stumbled. One girl froze halfway through her piece and had to start again. Miyuki found herself engaged in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't analyzing their technique or mentally correcting their timing. Instead, she was simply appreciating their courage, their effort, the pure expression on their faces when they played a passage they loved. During a brief intermission, an elderly man in the row ahead turned to Miyuki. "Aren't they wonderful?" he said, beaming. "My granddaughter is playing the Mozart piece. Her hands are so tiny still, but she practices every day." "She played beautifully," Miyuki replied, surprised to realize she meant it. The girl had made several mistakes, but there had been moments of real musicality in her performance. The second half began, and Miyuki found herself leaning forward in her wheelchair, increasingly absorbed. She had forgotten this feeling, the communal experience of live music, the shared breaths of anticipation, the collective joy at a particularly well-played phrase. Then Hana was at the microphone, introducing Yuki Nakamura, age 8, performing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. A tiny girl with a serious face and a neat black bob walked carefully to the piano. She adjusted the bench with a precision that made Miyuki smile. She had done the exact same thing at that age. Yuki took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of the Nocturne filled the hall, and Miyuki stopped breathing. The piece was far beyond most 8-year-olds' capabilities, but Yuki played with a surprising maturity. There were technical imperfections, of course, but there was also something else. A natural sensitivity to the music that couldn't be taught. Memories flooded Miyuki's mind. Her first performance of this piece at age 12, the hours she had spent perfecting the delicate ornamentations, the competition where a judge had told her she had Chopin hands, one of the highest compliments a pianist could receive. By the time Yuki reached the final gentle chords, tears were streaming down Miyuki's face. She hadn't cried since the early days after her accident, but now she couldn't stop. They weren't tears of self-pity or grief, though. They were tears of recognition, of remembering what it felt like to love music so purely, without the weight of ambition or fear of judgment. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Yuki bowed, her serious face breaking into a shy smile. When she looked up, her eyes scanned the crowd and locked with Miyuki's. Someone, Hana, no doubt, had pointed out to her that the lady from the video was here. Miyuki found herself smiling through her tears and giving the girl a small nod. Yuki's face lit up and she bowed again, this time directly toward Miyuki. After the final performer, parents rushed forward with congratulations and flowers. Miyuki remained in her spot, unsure whether to leave quietly or wait for Hana. The decision was made for her when a small figure in a frilly dress appeared beside her wheelchair. "Are you Miss Tanaka?" Yuki asked, eyes wide. "The one who plays in the video?" Miyuki nodded. "I am. You played beautifully today, Yuki-chan." The girl blushed deeply. "Not as good as you." "But I practiced every day." "I could tell," Miyuki said. "You have a special touch with Chopin." Yuki beamed. "Miss Hana says you were going to play with the big orchestra before." She trailed off, her eyes darting to the wheelchair. "Before my accident," Miyuki finished for her. There was no point pretending it hadn't happened. "Do you still play?" Yuki asked with the direct curiosity only children can get away with. The question hit Miyuki like a physical blow. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." Yuki frowned, clearly puzzled. "But why? Your hands still work, right?" Before Miyuki could respond, Hana appeared and gently redirected Yuki to her waiting parents, mouthing sorry over her shoulder. Later, as they sat in a nearby cafe, Hana finally asked the question Miyuki had been dreading. "So what did you think?" Miyuki stirred her tea. "The children played well. You're a good teacher." "Thank you. But that's not what I'm asking." Miyuki looked up at her friend. "What do you want me to say, Hana?" "That being there made me want to play again?" "That I'm suddenly ready to move on?" Hana reached across the table and took Miyuki's hand. "I just want you to consider that your life as a musician doesn't have to be over because you're in a wheelchair. Your talent, your gift, it's still there." "It's not the same," Miyuki said, pulling her hand away. "I can't pedal properly. I can't move around the keyboard the way I used to. I can't—" "Have you tried?" Hana interrupted. "Have you actually sat at a piano since the accident and tried to play?" Miyuki fell silent. They both knew the answer. There are adaptive techniques, special pedals. Pianists with all kinds of physical challenges still perform. Hana continued gently. The great Juan Carlos Martins conducted and played even after losing the use of his hands. He used special gloves. "I know all that," Miyuki cut in. "But I'm not them. I was trained to play a certain way. I can't bear to be less than I was." "Maybe you'd be different," Hana suggested. "Not less." They finished their tea in silence. As they parted outside the cafe, Hana handed Miyuki a CD. "Recordings of all my students playing their recital pieces from last year. Yuki's on track 7. She's improved so much since then." Hana smiled. "Just listen to it, okay? As a favor to me." That night, Miyuki placed the CD on her bedside table without playing it. But Yuki's innocent question echoed in her mind. But why? Your hands still work, right? She wheeled herself into the living room and stopped in front of the piano. For the first time in 3 years, she reached out and lifted the fallboard all the way. The keys seemed to glow in the dim light, beckoning. Slowly, tentatively, Miyuki positioned her wheelchair at the piano bench and moved herself over in a maneuver she had practiced countless times for other furniture. It wasn't graceful, but she managed to settle on the bench, her useless legs arranged carefully. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Then, almost of their own accord, they descended onto a simple C major chord. The sound resonated through the quiet apartment, clear, pure, alive. Miyuki closed her eyes and played another chord, then another. No melody, just simple harmonies, but it was music, her music, filling the space that had been silent for too long. She played for only a few minutes before exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed her. As she carefully transferred back to her wheelchair, she realized her cheeks were wet with tears again. It wasn't a triumphant return. It wasn't a declaration that she was ready to be a pianist again. But it was a beginning, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart since the accident. As she wheeled toward her bedroom, Miyuki paused to pick up the CD Hana had given her. Perhaps she would listen to it after all. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened in Miyuki's apartment. The silence that had reigned for 3 years was gradually filled with music. It started with just a few minutes each day, simple scales and arpeggios as she reacquainted her fingers with the keyboard. Her hands remembered what to do even if her heart was still uncertain. At first, she played only in the mornings when she knew her neighbors were at work. The thought of anyone hearing her tentative attempts was unbearable. But as days passed, her sessions grew longer. She rediscovered pieces she had played as a student, Bach inventions, Mozart sonatas, Chopin preludes. The first time she attempted to use the pedals was frustrating. Her legs couldn't feel the subtle resistance, couldn't gauge the appropriate pressure. She ended up ordering special pedal extensions online, designed for pianists with limited leg mobility. When they arrived, she spent hours adjusting them until she found a configuration that worked. One afternoon, Miyuki was lost in playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, the last piece she had performed before her accident, when a knock at her door startled her. She quickly closed the piano and wheeled to answer it, heart racing. It was Mrs. Yamamoto, the elderly neighbor who had brought her rice balls. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the old woman said, eyes twinkling, "but I was watering my plants on the balcony and heard the most beautiful music coming from your apartment." Miyuki felt her face flush with embarrassment. I was just practicing a little. I hope it didn't disturb you." "Disturb? My dear, it was like having a private concert." Mrs. Yamamoto clasped her hands together. "My late husband would have been overjoyed. He always said Debussy captured the sound of moonlight." "That's a lovely way to describe it," Miyuki said, surprised by the woman's knowledge of classical music. Might you play something else?" Mrs. Yamamoto asked hesitantly. "Just a short piece?" "I've brought sweet bean cakes," she added, holding up a small package. The request caught Miyuki off guard. She hadn't played for anyone since the accident. But there was something so genuine in the old woman's request that she found herself nodding. "Just one piece," she agreed, wheeling back to allow Mrs. Yamamoto to enter. As she positioned herself at the piano again, Miyuki's hands trembled. She chose a simple Chopin nocturne, not the one Yuki had played, but a gentler one in F major. As she began playing, she was acutely aware of her audience of one, sitting quietly on her sofa. But soon the music took over. She forgot about being observed, forgot about her limitations, and simply played. When she finished, she was startled by the sound of applause. Mrs. Yamamoto was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "That was beautiful, my dear. Truly beautiful." They shared tea and bean cakes afterward, and Mrs. Yamamoto told stories about concerts she and her husband had attended in their youth. It was the longest conversation Miyuki had had with anyone besides Hana in years. As Mrs. Yamamoto was leaving, she paused at the door. "You know, there's a small group of us in the building, mostly retirees, who meet every Thursday evening for tea and conversation. We would be honored if you would join us sometime." Miyuki hesitated, then nodded. Maybe someday soon, that evening. She called Hana for the first time in weeks. "I played for my neighbor today," she said without preamble when Hana answered. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Hana's voice, thick with emotion. "Miyuki, that's wonderful. How did it feel?" "Strange, scary," Miyuki paused, "but also right somehow. Like speaking in my native language after years of being silent." "That's exactly what it is," Hana said. "Music is your language." They talked for nearly an hour, Miyuki sharing details about her gradual return to playing, Hana offering suggestions for adaptive techniques she had researched. "There's a pianist in Osaka who performs regularly despite having limited mobility in his legs," Hana said. "He's giving a masterclass next month. Would you consider attending?" 2 months ago, Miyuki would have refused immediately. Now she found herself saying, "I'll think about it." Her daily practice sessions became the highlight of her day. She still struggled with certain techniques. Rapid pedal changes were particularly challenging. But she was adapting, discovering new ways to approach familiar music. Kimiko, the aide who helped with housekeeping and errands 3 times a week, noticed the change immediately. "You seem happier," she observed as she helped Miyuki with her weekly grocery list. "Your eyes have more light in them." Miyuki didn't realize how obvious the change was until her next video call with her parents. Her mother gasped when she answered. "Miyuki, you look different. Have you changed your hair?" "No, Mom, same hair." Miyuki smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I've started playing again." The joy on her parents' faces was almost overwhelming. Her father actually wept, something Miyuki had only seen once before on the day of her accident. "Will you play something for us?" her mother asked eagerly. "Just a little?" Miyuki positioned her phone so they could see her at the piano and played a short piece by Schumann that had been her father's favorite when she was a child. It wasn't perfect, her technique was still rebuilding, but the emotion she poured into it more than made up for any technical flaws. One rainy afternoon, Miyuki was playing with her windows open, enjoying the way the sound of raindrops complemented Sati's gymnopedies. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice the man standing under an umbrella outside her ground floor window until she finished the piece. "Excuse me," he called, when she looked up, startled. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I couldn't help stopping to listen. Your playing is extraordinary." Miyuki rolled back from the piano, embarrassed. "Thank you, but I'm just practicing." The man, middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, smiled. "Even your practice is worth hearing. My name is Takeshi Mori. I'm the artistic director of the Kyoto International Music Festival." Miyuki's heart skipped a beat. The Kyoto Festival was one of Japan's most prestigious classical music events, drawing performers from around the world. "I was visiting a friend who lives in your building," he continued, "and was walking to my car when I heard you playing. Fate, perhaps." He paused. "Would it be too forward to ask your name?" "Miyuki Tanaka," she said quietly, waiting for recognition to dawn on his face. It did, almost immediately. "Tanaka, weren't you scheduled to perform the Rachmaninoff Concerto with the Tokyo Symphony a few years ago? I read about an accident." Miyuki nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, that was me." "What a tragedy for the music world," he said softly. "And yet here you are, still making such beautiful music." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and handed her a business card through the window. "Our festival is in 8 weeks. We had a cancellation. A pianist who was to perform the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 has fallen ill and won't recover in time. Would you consider taking his place?" Miyuki stared at him in shock. I can't. I haven't performed in public since before my accident. And that concerto? It's too demanding, especially the pedaling." Mr. Mori nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concerns, but I've just heard you play with remarkable sensitivity and skill. The technical aspects can be worked out. We have experience accommodating performers with various needs." When Miyuki still hesitated, he added gently, "Just consider it. That's all I ask. The invitation remains open until the end of the month." After he left, Miyuki sat in stunned silence, the business card clutched in her hand. Perform at the Kyoto Festival? The very idea was terrifying. And yet, she wheeled to her bookshelf and pulled out her old score of the Rachmaninoff Concerto. The pages were worn from countless hours of practice before her accident. This was the piece she had been preparing for her debut with the Tokyo Symphony, the performance that never happened. Her phone rang. It was Hana. "You'll never believe what just happened," Miyuki said. After she explained about the unexpected invitation, there was a moment of silence on the line. Miyuki, this is incredible, Hana finally said. It's like the universe is giving you a second chance at the exact same piece. It's impossible, Miyuki argued. That concerto is one of the most technically demanding in the repertoire. The pedaling alone is something you can adapt to, Hana interrupted. Remember that pianist in Osaka I mentioned? He performs concertos regularly. Different techniques, same music. I'd have to relearn so much, and you have 8 weeks, Hana pointed out. And you already know the piece intimately. I'd need a teacher, someone who understands the challenges. As it happens, Hana said, and Miyuki could hear the smile in her voice. I know someone who has been researching adaptive piano techniques for the past few years. She's not famous, but she's pretty dedicated. You? Miyuki couldn't help but laugh. Me, Hana confirmed. Ever since your accident, I've been studying how pianists with various physical challenges adapt. Just in case. Well, just in case you ever decided to play again. That night, Miyuki couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mr. Mori's invitation, about Rachmaninoff's sweeping emotional concerto, about performing on a stage again. The thought was terrifying. But for the first time in 3 years, it was also exhilarating. In the early morning hours, she wheeled herself to the piano and opened the Rachmaninoff score to the first page. The famous opening chords stared back at her, dark, powerful, challenging. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to play. The sound filled her apartment as dawn broke over Tokyo. Not perfect, not yet, but alive with possibility. The following weeks transformed Miyuki's quiet apartment into a studio of intense dedication. With Hana's help, she established a grueling practice schedule. 4 hours in the morning, a rest period midday, then another 3 hours in the afternoon. Her neighbors grew accustomed to the sound of the same passages being played repeatedly, each time with subtle differences as Miyuki refined her interpretation. The Rachmaninoff concerto was like climbing a mountain, and some days the peak seemed impossibly far away. The opening chords, once so natural to her, now required careful planning with her modified pedaling system. The thunderous octaves in the final movement left her arms aching. But there were also moments of breakthrough that brought tears to her eyes, when her fingers found new pathways across the keyboard. When a particularly challenging passage suddenly came together, Hana visited 3 times a week, bringing research on adaptive techniques and recordings of pianists who had overcome various physical challenges. They experimented with different pedal extensions until finding one that gave Miyuki the most control. The important thing to remember, Hana said during one particularly frustrating session, is that no one in the audience will be judging how you use the pedals. They'll be listening to the music. I'll be judging, Miyuki countered, wiping sweat from her forehead after a failed attempt at a difficult passage. Hana smiled patiently. That's because you're still comparing yourself to who you were before. What if, just for now, you tried to discover who you are as a pianist today? Those words stayed with Miyuki, echoing in her mind during her practice sessions. Who was she as a pianist now? Before the accident, critics had praised her technical precision, her faithful interpretations of the composer's intentions. She had been methodical, disciplined, perhaps even a bit rigid in her approach. Now her playing was changing. Without the same technical facility, she found herself focusing more on emotional expression, on finding the heart of each phrase. Her interpretation of the Rachmaninoff was becoming more personal, more vulnerable. 6 weeks before the festival, Mr. Mori arranged for her to rehearse with the orchestra conductor. Miyuki was nervous about meeting Maestro Yamamoto, known for his exacting standards and limited patience. Her parents insisted on coming to Tokyo for the occasion. "We want to be there for your first orchestral rehearsal," her mother said firmly when Miyuki tried to dissuade them. The rehearsal was held in a small concert hall at Tokyo University. As her father pushed her wheelchair into the hall, Miyuki felt a wave of anxiety so intense she nearly asked to leave. The sight of the grand piano on stage, the orchestra members arranging their music stands, the familiar bustle of preparation, it all brought back memories of the performance that never happened. Maestro Yamamoto greeted her with formal politeness, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes as he glanced at her wheelchair. "We'll start with the first movement only today," he said, just to establish tempos and general interpretation. 2 stagehands helped position Miyuki at the piano. She had insisted on using her own pedal extensions, which had been attached to the hall's Steinway that morning. As the orchestra tuned, she took deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. Then there was silence. The conductor raised his baton, nodded to Miyuki, and the orchestra began the dark, swirling introduction that would lead to the piano's entrance. Miyuki closed her eyes, feeling the music wash over her. When the moment came for her first notes, those famous descending chords that opened the piano part, her hands moved with a certainty that surprised her. The first run-through was rough. There were moments when Miyuki's timing was off, when her adapted pedaling technique didn't produce the effect she wanted. Twice the conductor stopped to adjust tempos, but there were also moments of real beauty, when piano and orchestra seemed to breathe together as one organism. After they finished the movement, there was a pause. Miyuki waited nervously for the conductor's critique. "Your interpretation has depth," he said finally. "Different from what I expected, but compelling. Let's try again from the development section." By the end of the 3-hour rehearsal, Miyuki was exhausted but exhilarated. The conductor had been demanding but fair, treating her exactly as he would any soloist. Not once had he made allowances for her condition, and for that she was grateful. As stagehands helped her off the stage, her parents were waiting, both with tears in their eyes. It was beautiful. "Miyuki," her father said, his voice choked with emotion. "Different from before, but somehow more you." That night, over dinner at their hotel, her mother asked the question Miyuki had been avoiding. "Are you ready for people to see you perform again? To be in the public eye?" Miyuki pushed her food around on her plate. "I don't know," she admitted. "When I'm playing, I forget about the wheelchair, about everything except the music. But the thought of wheeling onto that stage, of everyone seeing me like this—" "They'll see a brilliant pianist," her father said firmly. "Some will see only the wheelchair," Miyuki countered. "They'll come expecting a freak show or a sympathy performance. Then change their minds," her mother said with unexpected fierceness. "Make them forget everything except your music." The following weeks passed in a blur of rehearsals, practice sessions, and growing media interest. Word had spread about the comeback of Miyuki Tanaka, the promising pianist whose career had been cut short by tragedy. A music magazine requested an interview, which Miyuki reluctantly granted. "I'm not doing this as an inspirational story," she told the journalist firmly. "I'm doing it because I'm a pianist and this is the music I need to play." 5 days before the festival, disaster struck. Miyuki woke in the middle of the night with excruciating pain in her right hand. By morning, her wrist was swollen and she could barely move her fingers. The doctor's diagnosis was grim: tendinitis from overuse. "You need complete rest," he advised. "At least 2 weeks? No piano." "That's not possible," Miyuki said, panic rising in her throat. "I have a performance in 5 days." The doctor sighed. "I can give you anti-inflammatory medication and a brace to wear when you're not playing, but I strongly advise against performing." Miyuki called Hana in tears. "Maybe this is a sign," she sobbed. "Maybe I was foolish to think I could do this." "It's just tendinitis," Hana said calmly. "Many pianists deal with it. We'll modify your practice schedule. Short sessions with plenty of rest, ice between each session, and we'll focus on the left-hand parts and mental practice for the next few days." Somehow, Miyuki made it through those final days. She practiced in 20-minute increments, icing her wrist between sessions. She spent hours listening to recordings of the concerto, mentally rehearsing every note, every phrase. The night before the festival, she couldn't sleep. Rain pounded against her windows as a summer storm swept through Tokyo. It seemed fitting. Tomorrow she would either triumph or fail spectacularly, and either way her life would never be the same again. The morning of the performance dawned gray and drizzly. Miyuki's parents arrived early to help her prepare. Her mother brought the dress they had chosen together, a flowing gown of deep blue silk that arranged beautifully around the wheelchair. As her mother helped her with her hair, Miyuki caught sight of them both in the mirror, her mother's face lined with worry and pride, her own pale with nerves but somehow more alive than it had been in years. "Whatever happens today," her mother said, meeting her eyes in the reflection, "we are so proud of you. Not just for performing again, but for finding your way back to music, back to yourself." The journey to Kyoto was tense. Miyuki's wrist throbbed despite the medication, and doubts crowded her mind. What if she couldn't make it through the entire concerto? What if her adapted pedaling failed her at a crucial moment? What if the audience saw only her disability and not her music? Kyoto Concert Hall was imposing, a modern structure of wood and glass filled with people dressed in their finest. As Miyuki waited backstage, she could hear the murmur of the crowd, the orchestra tuning. Mr. Mori stopped by her dressing room. "The hall is sold out," he said with a smile. "Word has spread about your performance." That only increased Miyuki's anxiety. "So many people coming to see the spectacle of the pianist in a wheelchair," she said bitterly. "No," Mr. Mori corrected gently. "They're coming to hear Miyuki Tanaka play Rachmaninoff. The same reason they would have come 3 years ago." A stagehand appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Miss Tanaka." Miyuki looked at her reflection one last time, adjusted the brace on her right wrist and nodded. "I'm ready." The stage manager pushed her wheelchair to the wings of the stage. Miyuki could see the grand piano waiting, lid raised, gleaming under the stage lights. The orchestra was seated, the conductor poised to enter. Then it was time. As the stage manager began to push her wheelchair forward, Miyuki said quietly, "No, I want to do this myself." With steady hands, she wheeled herself onto the stage. The audience applauded, and she caught whispers, saw people leaning forward to get a better look. She kept her eyes on the piano, navigating carefully across the stage to where 2 stagehands waited to help position her. Once seated at the piano, she adjusted her position, tested the pedal extensions, and nodded to the conductor. As he raised his baton, Miyuki closed her eyes briefly, finding her center. The orchestra began, and Miyuki felt the music rise around her like a gathering storm. When her moment came, she placed her hands on the keyboard, pain in her right wrist momentarily forgotten, and began to play. The first notes flowed from her fingers, and suddenly nothing else mattered. Not the wheelchair, not the years of silence, not the audience watching with curious eyes. There was only Rachmaninoff's soaring, passionate music and her part in bringing it to life. Something extraordinary happened as Miyuki played the opening bars of the concerto. The pain in her wrist faded to a distant awareness, and time seemed to both stretch and compress. Each note felt perfectly placed, each phrase connected to the next with an inevitability that made the music feel as if it was playing itself through her. In the quiet passages, she could hear the gentle breathing of the audience, feel their collective attention focused on the conversation between piano and orchestra. When the music swelled, she moved with it, her upper body expressing what her legs no longer could. Miyuki had played this concerto dozens of times in practice, but never like this. Before her accident, she had approached it as a technical challenge to be conquered. Now she understood it differently, as Rachmaninoff's expression of his own journey from despair to hope. The composer had written it after recovering from a deep depression, and that emotional arc was embedded in every note. The first movement built to its thunderous climax, and Miyuki found reserves of strength she didn't know she had. Her right wrist protested, but she pushed through the pain, carried by adrenaline and the current of music. During the brief pause between movements, she caught the conductor's eye. There was respect there now, perhaps even admiration. He gave her a slight nod before raising his baton for the second movement. The second movement began with a gentle theme that always reminded Miyuki of a lullaby. As she played, she thought of all the nights she had lain awake after her accident, certain that she would never find peace again. Somehow the memory gave her interpretation a poignancy that she could feel resonating through the hall. Halfway through the movement, disaster nearly struck. A sharp pain shot through her right wrist, almost causing her to miss a note. Miyuki took a deep breath, adjusted her hand position slightly, and continued. She would not be defeated. Not now, not after coming so far. The delicate interplay between piano and orchestra in this movement had always been her favorite part of the concerto. Now she found herself listening to the other instruments with new ears, finding connections and conversations in the music that she had never noticed before. As the movement ended with its gentle, questioning chords, Miyuki allowed herself a moment to prepare for the challenge ahead. The third movement was the most technically demanding, with rapid passages that would test her injured wrist to its limit. The conductor waited until she gave a small nod, then launched the orchestra into the energetic opening of the final movement. Miyuki took a deep breath and plunged in, her fingers flying across the keys. There was a freedom in this movement that she had never experienced before, a sense that she was not so much playing the music as channeling it. When she reached the famous second theme, With its soaring melody that had become one of Rachmaninoff's most recognizable tunes, she felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the heart of the piece, a melody of such hope and triumph that it seemed to defy darkness itself. As Miyuki played it, she poured into it everything she had experienced: the despair after her accident, the long silence, the tentative return to music, and finally, this moment of reclaiming her voice as a pianist. The orchestra responded to her emotion, matching her intensity as the movement built toward its conclusion. The final minutes of the concerto were a test of endurance, with massive chords and sweeping arpeggios that demanded everything from a performer. Miyuki's wrist was screaming now, but she was too deep in the music to stop. As she approached the final climactic passages, she felt as if she was riding a wave that had been building for 3 years. All her grief, all her struggle, all her determination cresting in this moment. With the last thunderous chords, Miyuki felt something break free within her. Not her technique, which remained controlled to the end, but something deeper. As the final note resounded through the hall, she felt truly herself for the first time since the accident. There was a moment of complete silence as the sound faded. Then the audience erupted. The applause was deafening, rolling over Miyuki in waves. People were standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. The orchestra members were tapping their bows against their music stands, a musician's highest form of appreciation. Miyuki sat stunned, her hands still resting on the keys. She had done it. Despite everything, the accident, the years of silence, the injured wrist, she had played the Rachmaninoff from beginning to end, not perfectly, but perhaps more truthfully than she ever had before. The conductor extended his hand to her, and for a moment she stared at it in confusion. Then she realized he was treating her exactly as he would any soloist, inviting her to stand and acknowledge the audience. "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can," he said firmly, still holding out his hand. Understanding dawned on Miyuki. She didn't need to stand physically. She just needed to accept the recognition of her achievement. She took his hand and he raised it high, turning them both to face the audience. The applause intensified. In the front row, she could see her parents standing, tears streaming down their faces. Hana was a few rows back, clapping so hard it looked painful, and there near the aisle was little Yuki, the student who had played Chopin, jumping up and down in excitement. As the stagehands helped her back into her wheelchair, Miyuki felt lightheaded with exhaustion and emotion. Backstage was chaos. Orchestra members offering congratulations, festival officials beaming, photographers requesting just one more shot. Mr. Mori appeared with a bouquet of flowers so large it nearly obscured him. "That," he said, placing them in her lap, "was even more extraordinary than I had hoped." A young reporter pushed forward. "Miss Tanaka, how does it feel to make such a triumphant return to the stage?" Before she could answer, another question came. "Will you be performing more concerts now?" And another. "Do you see yourself as an inspiration to other disabled artists?" Miyuki felt overwhelmed, the adrenaline that had carried her through the performance now draining away, leaving her wrist throbbing and her mind foggy. Seeing her distress, her father stepped in. "My daughter has just completed an incredibly demanding performance. Questions can wait for another time." As her parents wheeled her toward the dressing room, a small figure darted through the crowd. It was Yuki, clutching a program book and looking up at Miyuki with shining eyes. "Miss Tanaka, you were amazing. Can I have your autograph, please?" Miyuki smiled, the first genuine smile since leaving the stage. "Of course, Yuki-chan." As she signed the program, Yuki asked solemnly, "When I grow up, can I play like you?" "You'll play like yourself," Miyuki answered. "That's even better." Later, after she had changed and most of the crowd had dispersed, Miyuki sat quietly with her parents and Hana in the empty dressing room. Her wrist was bandaged with ice and she was sipping tea, trying to process what had happened. "The critics will be raving tomorrow," Hana predicted. That performance was, there aren't even words. "I made mistakes," Miyuki said. "In the third movement especially." "My wrist—" "No one heard mistakes," her father interrupted gently. They heard music. There was a knock at the door. It was Mr. Mori again, this time with an older man Miyuki didn't recognize. "Miss Tanaka, forgive the intrusion. This is Mr. Kobayashi from the National Arts Foundation. He has a proposal he'd like to discuss with you when you're feeling up to it." Mr. Kobayashi bowed respectfully. We've been developing a program to make music education more accessible to children with disabilities. After hearing you play tonight, I'm convinced you would be the perfect artist to help lead this initiative. Miyuki blinked in surprise. Me? But I've only just returned to playing myself. Exactly, Mr. Kobayashi nodded. You understand the journey in a way few others could. These children need someone who knows both the challenges and the possibilities. As they discussed the potential project, Miyuki felt a sense of purpose blossoming alongside her rediscovered identity as a pianist. Perhaps her path forward wasn't exactly what she had imagined before her accident, touring the world's great concert halls as a solo, virtuoso, but it might be something equally meaningful. When they finally left the concert hall, it was past midnight. The rain had stopped and the streets of Kyoto glistened under the streetlights. Miyuki's father pushed her wheelchair toward their hotel, her mother walking beside them, one hand resting lightly on Miyuki's shoulder. What are you thinking? Her mother asked, noticing Miyuki's thoughtful expression. About something Hana said weeks ago. She asked me to consider who I am as a pianist now, not who I was before. Miyuki looked up at the clear night sky, where a few stars were visible despite the city lights. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what she meant. 6 months later, Miyuki stood, or rather, sat, before a group of children at the newly established Tanaka Foundation for Inclusive Music Education. Among them were children with various disabilities, some in wheelchairs like hers, others with prosthetic limbs, visual impairments, or developmental differences. Music belongs to everyone, she told them, wheeling herself to the piano. It doesn't care if you can walk or see or hear the way others do. It only asks that you listen with your heart and express what you find there. As she began to play, a simple piece she had composed especially for this first class, Miyuki caught sight of Yuki sitting in the back row. The girl had volunteered to be a peer mentor in the program, helping younger children navigate the basics of piano playing. Life had changed in ways Miyuki could never have imagined on that dark day, 3 years ago when she had come home from the hospital, certain that her music was lost forever. She still performed occasionally, Mr. Mori made sure of that, but teaching had become her primary focus. And each time she wheeled onto a stage, each time she positioned herself at a piano and placed her hands on the keys, she remembered that night in Kyoto when she had rediscovered not just music, but herself.